So very quick background of Samita. Samita Rao is a partner at Game Changer Law Advisors Bangalore office, and she has 14 years of experience in the law sector. Prior to joining Game Changer Law Advisors, Samita co-headed the legal department of Goldman Sachs, and she was the actually sole employment counsel covering the entire India office during the stint there. So which is quite a lot. I mean, I would love to understand how many people were employed at Goldman Sachs too at this later stage. Apart from spearheading the entire employment practice at Game Changer Law Advisors, she has spent the last year or so adding strength to the Game Changer Law Advisors social enterprise practice. So Game Changer Law Advisors focuses a lot in the social sector. They work with mission-driven organizations like Arthan does, and specifically to help these organizations navigate the complex legal and regulatory framework that are currently going on in the sector. Um, Before that, she has spent 6 years working for Amarchand Mangaldas and Suresh and Shroff Company, where she advised clients on merger and acquisition transaction, private equity, venture capitalist investment. Samita Rao graduated from National Law School of India, Bangalore in 2006. And she's an avid Wodehouse fan and hopes to see a day when lawyers display more wit than legal jargon. So I guess I hope, Samita, we will bypass the legal jargon in this conversation, particularly because that social sector we begin with the mindset of what a community would understand. So,
Yeah.
so over to you. Thank you so much, and would love to listen to you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Satyam. That was a very kind introduction, and I'm glad I have this opportunity today. And just to clarify for all our listeners, I'm very busy being a mother, less a lawyer. So just in case somebody thought I'm really busy advising NGOs or people who have been laid off on their legal rights. Okay, so I'll just get right into the presentation. So Satyam and I discussed, and we thought we'd have this more as an interactive session. So in a few minutes, Satyam will start asking me a few questions, and that's how we'll do this session. But just before that, I thought I will just set the tone for the whole session. And I've just put together a very few slides, very basic, just to give some context and background, which will form the whole backdrop for our session today. So at the outset, I have to say that there are no specific employment or labor laws for the social impact sector. So from an employment or a labor law lens, an NGO who has an office nationwide or in a particular locality or operating hyper locally is treated the same as, a Goldman Sachs office or the office of GlaxoSmithKline or any other company. What differentiates it is to the extent that there are a lot of regulations that apply to workers, that apply to factories. Those will not apply to a social impact organization, whether it is an NGO, whether it's a trust or things like that. Having said that, the framework of Indian labor laws is dual. So what that means is, because we are a federal nation, we have lawmaking authorities sitting at the center, which is the parliament, and we also have state legislatures which create laws. So labor laws are in a list that the constitution permits both the center and the state to legislate on. As a result, many of you may already know, there are leave regulations on how much vacation time people can take. That is regulated at the state. So an employee sitting in Delhi will have a different entitlement to an employee sitting in Bangalore. So this, of course, poses challenges, from framing policies for an organization where you want uniformity when you have multiple offices. A step here there are proposed consolidation of labor laws into 4 codes that are mentioned there: wages, social security, industrial relations, and working conditions. This is yet to see the light of day, but to just give you an extent of the multiplicity of laws, there are 50 plus laws today, and it's all proposed to be made into 4 codes. So it is quite a challenge in that sense as well, and we'll wait and see how that actually plays out. So quickly moving on, how do organizations actually engage with human resources. There are three primary structures. One is, of course, permanent employment, where you issue an employment letter. They are on the rolls of the organization. They get all employment benefits. Then, on the other hand, there is contract or consultancy kind of relationships where, say, you engage people on fixed term basis for specific projects, or depending on your grants. And I would say there is this third category now, which is getting more and more traction. And India is actually estimated to be the second biggest country for gig and platform workers. So these are pure play, consultants who just sit at home, say, okay, what, I have 4 hours in 3 days, I want this kind of work. They probably log into a portal which kind of connects them with an entity that requires their kind of skills and resources. The engagement is done completely on a contract basis, which is quickly concluded, mostly online. So this is kind of a bit of a gray area, because currently the laws don't really cater to these kind of workers, but it is something that the new codes will be talking about. So again, wages and salary, the regulations today are varied because they vary from state to state. Minimum wages are prescribed by each state, depending on the living conditions and the dearness allowance and other factors that each state determines. Social security contributions, which are primarily your provident fund contributions and your employee state insurance, that is centrally regulated. So that is uniform across the country, but wages and salary vary from state to state. The other regulations which apply across all organizations in the impact space is relating to the workplace conditions. So first is just equal pay for equal work. This is largely targeted at avoiding gender discrimination in the workplace. The second is also a bit more gender biased, because it's sexual harassment of women at the workplace, which is again a very critical legislation. And the last one is anti-discrimination laws. Largely, many of these operate in the government or semi-government space, but even for private establishments now, there is protection for people with disabilities and transgender people. The last one particularly has come about after the Supreme Court, recognized transgenders as a third gender. Okay, I think everyone's probably joined this webinar today to hear about the firing part of this slide. So, like a lot of the other things that I just mentioned, notice period requirements again are prescribed in the state laws. There is no central regulation saying this is the way you must fire people, this is the procedure or anything. Notice period is one of the main things that is a procedural guarantee. The second is, there is a concept of statutory severance or a separation pay. It's very, very unlikely it's going to apply to employees in the social impact sector, because this actually applies in the context of factories and to people who are workmen. That is, people who are performing skilled, semi-skilled work in establishments covered under the Industrial Disputes Act or the Factories Act. The last one, again, is I think something that we have seen has become a concern in the social impact sector, and this is post-termination obligations, because a lot of the value that is residing in an organization is most often, client contacts, client lists, proposals, a lot of the intellectual property that is generated during their employment. And it's very critical that entities are able to strongly enforce protection for these resources, especially after an employee has been terminated. So confidentiality, if you have non-competes where you don't want people, just jumping from one NGO to another, taking with them the whole of their know-how, or for instance, today somebody has got to hear about a lead in a particular for a CSR grant, and they are fired tomorrow. You don't want them joining a competitor and then taking up on that lead and becoming coming in conflict with you. So that's another big source that we have seen a lot of employment queries coming in. And on my last slide, I've just put together a few things which have bubbled up in the last 2.5 to 3 months, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. The first is obviously the whole debate around whether the government issued an advisory or an order telling private establishments not to fire employees during the lockdown period. Just so that everybody is clear, there is a lot of challenge to these circulars in the Supreme Court, and it's likely that the Supreme Court will give some judgment on it the next week. But in the interim, the court has clearly said no entity can be prosecuted for violating those orders because there is a doubt on whether it is constitutional or not. The second bucket, I think, of orders that have been issued and which impact employers and entities is the whole sanitization, hygiene, workplace, health and safety related regulations. When entities are now slowly starting to open up, there are a host of detailed regulations that have been issued on how much cleaning, social distancing, surveillance, etc., that needs to be undertaken. And this it will be a liability for every entity that is starting to open up. And this will be something that is covered under, say, workplace insurance or other things. In terms of support to employees, I think the government has done a couple of things. One is, the whole the Provident Fund changes that have been made, where employees are able to claim a non-refundable advance to kind of provide liquidity option to them. And there's also now a reduction in contribution for the next 3 months. And some of the states have also relaxed deadlines for making filings or making contributions. And there is again, I think, a lot of headlines being generated regarding a lot of the BJP ruled states giving out these relaxations, a clean chit to employers to kind of hire people, make them work for any number of hours, increasing working hours in factories and all of that. So those are again things that are debatable from a pure legal and constitutional standpoint, and we'll have to see where those things end up. I will pause there, and I think Satyam, we can then get into the whole Q&A, which will hopefully be more helpful to our listeners. Satyam, I think you're on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
No matter how many webinars one would attend, you will always forget to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for walking us through the presentation and talking about the different scenarios, especially in terms of employment contracts and the obligation of employers and employees. I think I would jump in now. So just as a background to the audience, we have been asking people for the kind of questions we should address in this session. So we have compiled the questions from the participants. Some of you have already given that to us. And some of the questions were similar. So we have bucketed them into 10 questions right now. So I think I'm going to now ask Samita these questions first. In terms of format, we will keep like 20 to 30 minutes for a question and answer session between me and Samita. And then we'll open up to the audience. I would like to give a disclaimer that some of these legal things cannot be answered in detail over a webinar. So in case we are not able to address those, we will try to come back to you with an explanation over the period of time. And you will also get the details of both me and Samita after the session, so you can reach out to us, whatever is in. Great. So I mean, Samita, thank you once again. So the first question actually which was asked was, what are the legal implications that are brought over an organization, in this case, an NGO registered under Society Act, for laying off employees, contractual consultants during the COVID-19 crisis? I think your presentation also touched upon that briefly. So what are the implications, legal implications that are brought over an organization, in this case being an NGO?
Yeah. This, I think there are two parts to this, and we should break them up into laying off or employees, which are permanent employees, and laying off contractual consultants.
Mhm.
The whole government orders that were issued in March and April regarding, which were allegedly prohibiting employers from firing people or reducing pay. That, like I said, is being challenged. So we'll set that aside for now. But while that is pending, every entity should really consider carefully who are their who are the staff that needs to be let go. Or if there are any other alternatives for you to implement to kind of save the day. So the first thing is, if you are really you're forced to let go of employees, full-time employees, you need to first look at their employment contracts and see what are the termination clauses. Most contracts today will have a termination for convenience clause, which basically will read on the lines of, either the company or the employee can end the employment by giving 30 days notice, or maybe a little longer in case of senior employees. So that is the clause you really need to look for. And you need to just ensure that most state legislations have a 30-day notice period. In some cases, it could be higher. So if a local regulation requires a higher notice period than what your contract says, you need to give that notice period. And that is the way in which you will go about the layoff for a permanent employee. In the case of consultants, it's a little more easier because one, you can obviously look at the contract end date. If it's anyway coming to an end in the next few weeks, you just let it lapse. You do not renew it. Secondly, if you're midway or you still want to terminate it, you can still just look at the termination clause in your consultant contract and then issue a notice. In the case of employees, you will also have a liability to ensure full and final settlement of all employee dues. This will typically be salary up to the last date, and unused vacation or gratuity in case of eligible employees. Like I said a bit earlier, there is no requirement for statutory severance, but given what we're operating in, and if there is any leeway in terms of your finances, I think organizations may consider giving some amount of runway in terms of liquidity for employees who are being laid off. Again, I want to clarify, this is not a statutory requirement, but more, humanity or humane based treatment. But I think I will, in terms of the legal implications arising, I think we should set aside the whole COVID orders and just go through it as a procedural thing, like I just talked about. But overarching, I think overlaying all of this is the requirement to be humane. We are seeing a lot of headlines today. Uber did a layoff of 1,000+ employees with a 3-minute Zoom call. So it's just pretty much a mimic of what we're doing today, and everybody's told, okay, you're fired and you've lost your job, instead of attending a webinar trying to learn a bit more about the law. So that's not something that will definitely go down well. So be a bit more thoughtful, considerate, and I think this is where we really need to be thoughtful about everybody. You need to be really, really clear and transparent with everyone why you need to do this. How is this impacting you as a business? Because at the end of the day, we must remember there is a constitutional right to carry on any profession or business, and that also carries with it the way in which you do business, as well as to shut it down or close it down, which is all constitutional guaranteed. So as long as you are comfortable and being thoughtful, and you are confident that you have a clear business case, that I think that is the way to go. And obviously you can't be risk-free, but you will reduce a lot of legal risk if you take that approach.
Thank you so much. That's very, very helpful, Samita, to understand what an organization should keep in mind. And I like the fact that you have mentioned that end of the day, beyond everything mentioned in the employment contract, you have to think from the heart too, which is critical in this day and age, because mostly the people who we are letting go of are not going to find an employment soon. So beyond legal perspective, we are also seeing organizations who are trying to support their staff by giving them few months salary and runway, so that they can find an opportunity. I mean, finding an opportunity during a lockdown is almost impossible. Now we are seeing some version of virtual onboarding happening, but that's happening for people who have been there for a while. That comes to my next point. So you have covered what an employer should keep in mind. Now, Samita, what happens if, what are the legal and ethical actions an employee can take or reach a settlement who has been asked to move on by the organization? And like you said, the Uber example, like, what would be a version of that in the social impact sector if I've been asked to move on by my employer? What can I do?
Look, I mean, as a lawyer, I would love to say, hey, here's your Bill of Rights. You can, come on. I'll take you on as a client. Your company has done you so much distress, caused you so much distress. Come, let's go to court. But unfortunately, that is not really an option. I would advise somebody who's been laid off. Look, I think everybody needs to recognize this is a catch-22 situation. On the one hand, you have, and, NGOs or entities in the social impact sector where grant money is drying up. I think and the people who are working in spaces where there is, it's not a COVID-19 impact, there is a lot of CSR money that is being impacted, and you really don't have work to provide to your employees. So that is one situation. On the other situation, of course, you have people who are sole earners who have a lot of other, financial and other exigencies to meet at the current time. But purely from a legal rights perspective, I think an employee can only think of challenging it on a procedural ground. Like I mentioned, what is the procedural requirement here today? It is a notice period requirement. So for instance, if you've been, you've gone the Uber way and said, hey, you know what, this is it. You haven't given them the notice period. That is one ground on which you can challenge it. But otherwise, really, this is, will start off a whole opening up a box where you're not really going to get anything, because sending a legal notice is taking a very offensive position, which is, going to put the organization or the employer on the defensive. And there is a lesser chance of, kind of getting any kind of a settlement. So instead, what I would, advise is really make out what your case is per se and be reasonable in what your demand is for a settlement. And again, like I said at the end of my last answer, you have to appeal to the human side of people right now. And that is one thing. But I think from just to flip it from if I were advising the NGO that has fired or laid off the employee, the other risk, again, you will need to be mindful of, lesser a legal risk, but it's more a reputational risk, which is people taking to social media. That is a very real risk, and that can again cause more damage and reputational loss than actually having a legal claim being brought. And companies today are being much more mindful about taking any actions because of this. So two key takeaways. One is, be clear about what are your procedural requirements, follow that to the T. And the second is, keep an eye out for your reputational risks from a social media perspective.
Great point, Samita. I would also like to add, I mean, personally in my career, when I was part of various different not-for-profits, I learned that for grant making, every CSR or every foundation is going to conduct due diligence, where they also look at the legal side of things. So, I mean, my assumption is that in case certain set of employees will decide to go to the court, labor court, over the period of next 6 months, that can actually potentially impact the funding for a long period of time. Because I think once your name is in a court as a not-for-profit, I'm not sure how many corporations would like to support from a CSR lens. So I think we need to also think about this as not just a COVID play. Like probably you should think about it for the next 5 to 10 years, right? Because once you, as you said, once your reputation is tainted, it's very difficult to face it. And I don't think us as a sector, as a not-for-profit sector, we understand that very well. That, once it's done, because none of these funders will come and tell us that they are going to do a due diligence and they figured this out. And they actually do both. I mean, they scan your social media, they look at your employees, they go to the Glassdoor. Everything that is present on internet is actually up for consumption. anything that is negative gets more attention than anything that is positive. So clearly, like, we need to keep those things in mind. uh, that comes to my next point, Samita, which is, I mean, we all a lot of lot of people are saying this is not the last time something like this is happening, right? I mean, so probably there's a reoccurrence that can happen. Probably there's a possibility that we are getting into lockdown that is getting flexible in a manner, but there's again a possibility that after 3 months we have another wave and there can be another lockdown. So now, from a like a perspective on employment contracts, uh, what should one keep in mind to protect the employees? Because we have not focused so much on employment contracts in the social sector.
Yeah.
I mean, now if you have to safeguard interest of employees, keeping in mind that pandemics like this can reoccur, or any other natural disaster that can happen in the country, climate change being one of them, we are seeing the implication of that. So what are the things I should do in my employment contract?
Yeah, so I think that's a really tough question, Satyam, to answer, because it's kind of looking into it's crystal ball gazing. But I really don't have an answer to that, which can be which can be definitively answered one way or the other. See, at the end of the day, resources are limited. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is allocate scarce resources in the most efficient way possible and to the most needy. So from a purely contractual perspective, see, there are already regulations on minimum wages. So tomorrow, if this were to arise again, there should be a guarantee that people will get their minimum wages, provided, of course, they're able to work in some form. So that is obviously one thing that's already taken care of. But I doubt there can ever be a situation where there is a contractual guarantee for never being fired for a business-related reason, at least. That is something that is integral to the way in which an organization does business, and you cannot take that away by contract. So having said that, I think this is a bit more different if you extrapolate this to the organized sector, which is when I'm looking at like factories and manufacturing sector where there are trade unions. There is already a lot of talk about trade union leaders coming and trying to change settlement agreements to ensure that there is some protection, or things like giving a more longer notice period if you were to lay off somebody, because that again gives some runway for employees to plan. So if you are in a 30-day notice, increase it to 60 days or 45 days, which means that you are at least having a job for the next 45 days. But otherwise, I think this is really a space where the government really needs to step in. So right now you have talk about the National Disaster Management Fund, you have the PM CARES Fund, and the whole finance minister's relief packages for many other industries. I did try searching a lot, but I don't think there's any real relief in any sense for the impact sector. But I did also come across some estimates, which are obviously back of the envelope calculations. But apparently, there could be 30 to 60% dip in grant money coming into traditional CSR activities. So where does that leave the impact sector, right? Because people working in these spaces are the ones who are probably at the grassroots levels are directly impacted. So I think this is really a case for wage subsidies, or direct government support to entities that really need it in this space. And I mean, you are obviously better placed, but this is there an equivalent of a NASSCOM in the impact sector that can go and influence and ask for some sort of guarantees? Because I don't think bilateral contractual guarantees are something that's going to be effective. Right. And you must remember, today it's an unequal bargaining power. To the extent that an employee has any rights, it's obviously the more powerful relation, the more power in the relationship is with the organization.
Right. No, makes sense. I mean, and you touched upon something which is of something that few of us have been thinking about, that why don't we have an NASSCOM and a FICCI and a CII for the social sector? Because ultimately someone needs to advocate for these rights. And
yeah.
A lot of conversation is going on where, we are seeing economic packages coming in for MSMEs. Technically speaking, we are part of the MSME ecosystem. It's just a different legal registration, right? I mean, of a society and a trust. But if you start following the definition of a service industry in a MSME, just going by the number of employees, we would be in a very, very, similar kind of like scenario here.
Yeah, exactly.
I also wanted to check. I mean, what are the legal changes an employee can make when it comes to retaining their staff rather than they have to let go of them in light of COVID. So we are also seeing people talking about salary deductions and
Yeah.
reduced pays, furloughing staff, not paying them for X number of months and asking them to be on the roll. If you can shed us a light on how does that span out, like for a employee or for
Yeah.
an employer, both.
Yeah, sure. So I think there are quite a few other options that companies have started implementing. Some of which are creative, and some of which are unused but have been there on the rule books. The first is something called a job share or a work share arrangement, which is basically if you and I do similar work, and both of us of course now are in a position where we're unable to perform say full 8 hours. We enter into a job share agreement, and the total of our output is equivalent to one person's output. And I take a reduced pay, and you take a reduced pay. But what that means is I continue to have a job, and so do you, instead of letting one of us go. And it's a win-win for the organization, because you're still getting two different people's skill sets and available to you during this crisis. This is something that a lot of companies have started slowly implementing. It's really common in many other countries across the globe, and it's a very institutionalized mechanism. So this is something that we can definitely look at. The second is, like you said, restructuring salaries, and this can again take two forms. One is, kind of don't alter the entire amount, but alter the variable component within that amount. So, ask employees to take home a slightly lower amount today, in the hope that, if the organization performs better, we're all going to share it. This is something that will work in probably smaller organizations, or with, companies which have a culture of sharing risk, where you have the entire, the workforce is, treated like a family and things like that. The second form this can take is obviously, a pure number reduction. So from 100, you come down to 90. This, I think, what we have seen is many companies are doing this in a staggered way. So starting to reduce pay of more senior level employees, where, there is a bit more ability on the employee's part to stomach a reduction on a take home pay. So these are some things you can look at an individual level as well as an organization wide level. And I think in today's context for India, and where you have employees who are members of the Provident Fund organization, you should definitely encourage them to look at the option of taking a non-refundable advance. It's been a huge success, going by what the statistics have shown. And it's getting 3 months, up to 3 months of wages as a non-refundable advance, and you continue to be a member, you continue to hold your employment. And where you see that employees have taken this advance and they have some liquidity, you might then want to reduce the pay from the employer, because then you know that they already have a source of liquidity for the next few months. I think just one other piece is changing the frequency of payments wherever you have that leg room again. Maybe move to once in 2 months, or a quarterly payment, salary payment cycle. Again, what that does is just conserve liquidity for the organization. It kind of gives you some more resources to build up more capacity, and then gives you a bit more leeway at a later point in time.
That's a great point. I mean, honestly, I've heard this point around quarterly payment for the first time. Just trying to understand. So, how does it play out psychologically for an employee? So, if I go to someone and say, I'm going to pay you July, August, September salary directly in the month of October, or whatever, June, July, August, after 3 months. Do you think like an employee would, I mean, even if it's a written statement, right? We are not expecting anyone to make amendments in the contract in the present climate. The maximum you expect is an email coming from a management saying 3 months you will not get paid, and the 4th month you will get paid for all the 3 months, right? Assuming you are part of a company where the culture of risk sharing doesn't exist. This is happening for the first time. It's a very top down communication. How should I see that as a employee?
This is nothing but a kind of a furlough, right?
Yeah,
Where you're trying to preserve employment. So I think what you need to really sell out over here is the piece about you're retaining your employment. I'm not firing you.
right,
So
right.
you're not out on the street. So I think is the biggest benefit of this whole of any of these exercises, right? And that's the biggest worry today anyone has today. Because see, losing a job right now is of course the whole thing about being unemployed. But for people who are say finished 4 years, they're going to lose out on gratuity. That is a big deal. And that is a lot of money. So if there's any way people can stay on rolls and preserve their employment tenure, a lot of people are in that bucket where it's more important for them to hold the job than to actually receive the money, because you do realize that there is no work to be done in some cases.
Right.
In certain places, there is nothing that the organization can offer you by way of work. So for those employees, I think where you can do this deferment is it's basically a furlough. Put it in another way. And the other thing that I just want to comment is that people losing jobs, there's also stigma attached to a termination, right? And it's about, oh my God, what's it going to show up on my career, on my, when somebody does a background check on me. So that's the whole other fear that, it will be a permanent blotch on their resume whenever they go to a new employer. So I think protecting, it's basically a toss up, tenure versus money in some cases. So
Right, right,
you have to pick the lesser of the evils, or it's devil and the deep sea.
right, right, right. Great. I mean, Samita, I think I will like to start I taking few questions. We have our own list, as you know already.
Yeah,
If you don't mind, I think I would like to see what questions people
sure,
ask,
sure.
and try to see if we can answer some of those. So yeah, so I guess so there's a question on. mm okay, by Pooja Mathur, which is what notice period requirement be driven by law or by the terms of employment contract for supervisory staff? I'm assuming this is by employment contract.
Yeah, this will be by employment contract, because most states do not regulate employment of supervisory staff. But this should be true supervisors. So it's not just you go by the designation vice president and determine he's a supervisor. They actually should be performing some sort of management functions or have a supervisory role in the organization.
Same question, but can pre-existing terms defined in the employment contract be closed during this time? I'm not respecting the employment contract. I think that's what.
Termination, is it pre-existing?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a fixed term contract, I'm assuming, that you're referring to. And yes, you can terminate fixed term contracts as per the terms. Usually there should be a provision, but I would think that there will be some sort of penalty for terminating it early or prematurely. So you may have to pay for the rest of the term or something of those kinds. But those are the things that we've seen. Or if it's a slightly more longer term contract, say for 2 years, there might be a contractual provision saying neither party will terminate it for a period of 8 months, 10 months, or kind of a lock-in kind of a situation. So those things I think will be governed by specific contract provisions itself.
Got it.
Okay, I'll just take the next one also, which is can performance-based terminations be done? For sure. There is no, this is not a case where slackers or bottom performers are being given a, clean chit and can continue. Definitely, misconduct-based terminations or performance-based terminations, which you would normally have undertaken during this time. Please go ahead and do it, but please be very, very careful about the procedure. Because most often, most litigations are on the basis of procedural irregularity. So you have not issued a show cause notice, you have not recorded the fact of non-performance, you have done a verbal conversation and the person has said, yes, I have done all these mistakes, who have not followed it up with an email. These are small things which can prove costly, but like I said a little earlier, please follow the procedural requirements to the T.
Okay. Uh, I have a next question, which you can also read from
Yeah.
Priyanka Thakur, which is would like to check how can we let go of employees due to cost cutting when it's clearly mentioned to serve 1 month notice period?
Yeah, see, I think, like I said, a cost cutting will be nothing but, a termination for convenience. It will not be misconduct or, those kind of terminations. So, what I would just caution over here is, in addition to following the procedural things, um, in my experience, I have seen that, legal risk is increased in certain individual cases because of certain individual related factors. What I mean by that is, first determine what is the business case. Based on that, do your selection of employees or contractors. Once you have done that, please do try and do an individual based risk assessment, because you may have people, say, who are on maternity. You do not want to touch them at that point, because that is a huge legal risk. Second are cases of protected categories, like I said, persons with disabilities or transgenders. And just even from a more humane standpoint, you might want to protect more vulnerable categories where you have the choice. And there's a third category which is often overlooked, which is kind of people who have, say, raised grievances, or somebody's just a cantankerous employee has been complaining, has raised a sexual harassment complaint, and 2 weeks later she's on the list for being laid off. That is really a huge risk, huge legal risk, I would say, because that can be treated as retaliation. So in these kind of situations, it's really good to do an individual based risk assessment before you take your final decision and do your communication.
Got it. Uh, I'm just jumping off some questions and we'll try to address as many of them, but I'm also looking at diversity in questions. So here, can an employee go to labor court for reduced wages?
So, the labor court here, what you're referring to is a specialized court which has been provided under the Industrial Disputes Act for resolving disputes, relating to industrial establishments. It's very unlikely NGOs are going to be falling within that definition of industrial establishments, and therefore, their employees are not going to be categorized as workmen, and they will not have access to a labor court. So this will go to a regular civil court as a suit for damages or a suit for reinstatement. So the access to a labor court is, I think, questionable and is less likely.
I also have an interesting question, which is, can we forfeit gratuity amount in case of employed willingly employees doing activities that are harming the organization during COVID time?
So gratuity is statutorily provided, loyalty payment, if I can describe it as that in that fashion. The statute there is very specific in which cases gratuity can be forfeited. It is not for any and all misconduct. So just because you have somebody who's a dishonest employee, and you've proven that through the disciplinary proceedings, and you're letting go of him or her, that does not give you the ability to forfeit gratuity. It is only in specific cases where there is damage to property, or there is damage caused by the employee's direct conduct. In those cases, you can forfeit gratuity to the extent of the damage. So it's, I think, as a rule of thumb, you should assume that gratuity is payable as a part of the full and final sentence.
There's also a question from Divya, which she's asking, can an organization implement a voluntary pay cut program?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing stopping you. It's kind of similar to, what all these VRS programs, which were retirement programs that were implemented. But yeah, I mean, there's no harm trying it out. I personally have not heard of this being done, but it may be something that people may be willing to come through with in this kind of a situation. I think it'll be culturally driven by each organization.
Right, right. Um,
I think I'll just like to take this one, Satyam, which is we have issued an offer letter to a candidate
yes, please.
who has accepted the offer before the lockdown, and the date of joining was 15th May, but you're not able to hire. Yes, you know, you can withdraw offers that have been accepted. That is again another source for cost cutting because you know you would rather protect people who have been with you and are more loyal to you. But I would just say that you know the minute you have visibility that you're unable to hire, I think do the communication immediately. And while there's no legal requirement to make any payment for that for the loss of the job, but perhaps I think as a goodwill gesture, I think 1 month salary or maybe at least a couple of weeks salary would be helpful, especially where you have joining dates that are really coming up very close right now.
Okay. Um, I'm looking at the okay. I'm looking at the last question right now, Samita. How can we go about legally restructuring employee contracts, keeping in mind the change in mode of work from home, remote location work online due to the pandemic? Any
Yeah.
changes made in the employment contracts, keeping in mind the lockdown?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think a legal the employment contract per se needs a restructuring because you would already have provisions presumably for saying you know you will work from you know office or any other place designated by the employer. So there should be enough flexibility within current contracts. But what I think will need changes is more on the organization's policies. So, for instance, today your IT policy is something that you will have to really look at because and you know your code of conduct because you'll have to put a more emphasis on trust and honesty and you know because the scope for sharing confidential information is higher today. So you know some companies of course which are more sophisticated and able to afford it are you know implementing technologies such as you know screen surveillance where people can even detect if there's a screenshot being taken and all those kind of things. But um, the contract per se, I would believe will be flexible enough to incorporate, you know, work from home, remote location. What you need to look at is like I said, you know, your IT policy for sure, your work from home policy. If you want to kind of make it a more formal arrangement, saying that this is the time, to also give you legroom to ensure that people are willing to come back once you say that it's time and for the office to function. I think that is something you need to build into your either policy or your contract, saying that this is not a permanent structure unless you know you do want to offer it as a permanent solution for a work from home option. Um, Privacy, I think code of conduct, those are the things that you will need to look at restructuring or taking a closer look.
And picking up this question, Samita, which talks about that the staff was not communicated about project closure. Instead, that they were informed of an extension, and after 2 months, they have been laid off. What can the staff do if they were told about an extension when the project was already closed?
Look, I think these are you know bad intent, malafide behavior by the organization. So, like I've been harping upon through most of the answers, I think it's important to be transparent. There's no real benefit in you know couching it in sweet talking it through or providing a misrepresentation to employees. You're more likely to get a buy-in when you are transparent. So today, if you know somebody's been told the project has been extended and they've organized their finances and everything based on that, they will probably have a good cause to sue you for at least saying that you know pay me for those 2 months where you told me that I'm going to have a job because I thought I was safe when you were actually laying off others. You told me I'm fine. So that I would think you know a court will also be more willing to give relief to that kind of a person.
Got it. There's also an interesting question from Shireen, which says, if an organization chooses to reopen the office, can an employee be penalized for choosing not to come in, keeping in mind personal risk? So what happens if you ask the employees to come in and they decide not to come in because of COVID risk, which would remain for the 12 months?
Yeah, exactly. So, look, I think this is a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Because you have to be really confident that your workplace is so safe that it is, and you're following all the government regulations. Because God forbid if something were to happen and the person contracts, the disease during in the workplace, then the employer is completely on the hook in terms of whether you have medical insurance for your employees or not. You probably will be bearing the cost of that person's medical treatment, and if there are any other family members who also contracted theirs and everything. So that is kind of a risk assessment that you need to take. I think it might be harder for people to enforce attendance in office for the next few months, at least until people get a bit more comfortable traveling and things like that, because you got to also take into account how that person is coming. Are you providing the transport? But then maybe you have a better justification for demanding their presence in office. The second is honestly assess whether the person is efficiently working from home, or is it requirement that they have to be sitting in office, or the client location, or wherever your project location is, because there is no guarantee you can give for a project location today. You do not know how the because that is not in your control. What you can control is your office premises, and if you are confident, do try and enforce it, but then see transportation and those kind of things. But if you are in a position where you are confident and the person is not willing, I think you should be able to tell them that you will be cutting wages for the time that they are not attending office.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm also taking this question, which is, if an employee does not accept the full and final settlement, does the organization have a right to deposit that amount in the employee account without his consent or concern? And if so, what are the post obligations for an organization?
Yeah, so this is the, I mean, it's not an unusual scenario where employees do not accept the full and final settlement, and entities do deposit it because they already have the bank account details of the employee. They do deposit that amount. You can go ahead and do that. What the employee is typically then does is that saying that, while I've noticed this deposit in my account, I am accepting this without prejudice. Basically, that means that just because that money is sitting in my account does not mean I've accepted your decision to terminate me, and I still reserve my right to challenge it. So if you get kind of a notice from the employee saying that the acceptance, this deposit is without prejudice, please be alert that this is probably a precursor to a formal challenge or to receiving a legal notice.
Got it. Um, a very relevant question for in light of COVID. So someone has asked, in terms of communication, how transparent should an organization be when it comes to informing the employees about COVID-19 positive cases among the employees? Should it be informed or kept confidential? Will telling them I mean, there's a whole anxiety element. And when the employees approach you and give you this information, how are you supposed to respond? And I would also like to add here, what are the COVID policies organizations should create, Samita? I mean, clearly COVID is not going anywhere. Are we looking at like a COVID organizational policies that people have to follow protocol wise? I'm asking personally because, I would like to implement at Athan too. I mean,
yeah, for sure. Okay, so let me take the first part of the question, which is, what do you do when you detect that somebody has tested COVID positive? Look, patient privacy is obviously important, but it assumes lesser relevance in cases where it is a contagious disease. And this is a generally accepted, exception to privacy and consent. So, even today, like even in an office today, if somebody were to get, say, chickenpox or conjunctivitis, which is again, something that's transmitted through contact, people will, the organization has the right to come and, clean, sanitize that person's desk, detect who all the person was in contact with, go and check on them. And it's very, very difficult to kind of protect the name of, or, identity of that person, because you already know that person stopped coming to office. And you will start reallocating work and all of those things. So that is one angle. The second is you today, because it is a pandemic and the situation we are in, you have also an obligation to inform the governmental authority. And this is there in the government circulars that are being issued, from time to time, at the end of each lockdown or at the start of each new lockdown. That you have to have a COVID policy in terms of, one is obviously sanitization, hygiene, etc., which you have to follow. But the second is you need to install surveillance for the public areas, which is your cafeteria, your desk spaces, workspaces, all of those things, because you need to monitor that social distancing is happening. And there has to be a person appointed from the organization as a nodal officer who will review the CCTV footage periodically to ensure that if people are violating social distancing, you are taking action against them. And this nodal officer is also responsible to coordinate with government agencies if there were to be a positive case. You will also have to empower that nodal officer to provide all information. So name of the person, their address, how are they coming to office, how long have they been working here, who all are they sitting with, all of that information. So yes, definitely there are going to be COVID specific policies, and starting with workspace, right? Like gone are the days of the sweatshop like desks, with hardly any elbow room for people to sit. So are you going to start looking at closed cabins for people, or are you going to make work from home a permanent option? So a lot of these things are going to be COVID specific until the time that we are told that we are living in a COVID world.
True, that makes sense, a lot of sense. And I guess, yeah, I mean, we have clearly, I received an email from a design agency saying, prepare your office for a post-COVID era. And
Yeah.
there are examples of that. So I guess that is also something we all need to start thinking about, because I guess, especially in the metropolitan cities, I won't be surprised if someone will show up and say that you don't have enough space between two people, and there will be a legal implication of that in the future.
Correct.
Also from office design lens. And work from home policies are going to be there for a long period of time. I mean, it's not going anywhere. So if we don't have those work from home policies, probably it's the right time to start designing them and thinking about them. Rather, it's the right time to start thinking about every form of policy, because I guess a lot of employees will also care about medical insurances, and specifically the insurances that will cover COVID, and how the organization is taking care of the welfare of the employees. Because as an organization, psychologically, employees care a lot more about other things beyond salaries. I mean, our learning, what kind of what kind of perks that they are getting. And I think in today's day and age, perks are not restricted to money, because there's also things beyond money.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it on the you hit the nail on the head, because I think medical insurance has become absolutely critical.
Right.
Even prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, a lot of surveys that I was reading were saying that millennials are actually looking at other things which are non-monetary. One of which was medical benefits, and the second was opportunities for contributing to society. Interestingly, which was a huge eye opener for me.
Right. Great. I mean, it's 5 o'clock, 5:03. I guess we have not been able to take all the questions up. As I said, it's some of these things are fairly complex, and we'll not be able to give a customized advice to everyone, because my personal learning has been that each of these cases we are talking about can take a couple of hours of brainstorming, of understanding the real background, how the organization is structured, how many staff are there, how are you communicating, what's given in writing, how people are perceiving this. So I mean, this is not just a legal thing, it's way beyond legal, and it gets into organizational communication, strategy, legal, in a fairly holistic manner. So I would first like to thank Samita for taking the time out to give us certain directions. I would just say that this is a beginning. We will continue. We are probably looking at end of June to have the next set of conversations around this. After this webinar, we will send a note to all of you. If there are certain questions which are not being answered, please feel free to write to us. We'll try to cover them over the period of time. If we can't reply back to individual emails, we'll definitely cover them in the next webinar. And you will get the details of both contact details of Arthan and Game Changer Law Advisors, So feel free to reach out to them directly. I mean, they are the experts, they're the lawyers. We are not the lawyers, like, to begin with. I think I've understood that very well. Like, some things need to be done by the lawyers, and in this case, lawyers have a more prominent role when it comes to employment contracts on both sides of the spectrum. Samita, any parting last points you would like to say specifically for the social impact community?
I think just two things. One is that this is obviously undoubtedly it's an uncharted territory and very distressing for everybody involved. But when if the listeners have the time, I found the message from the Airbnb CEO very thoughtful. I don't know if a lot of people had a chance, but they are, again, let go of more than half their staff and a large number of people across many countries. But it was a very thoughtfully crafted message, very transparent, and included even very small things of if you receive an email or a invite for a particular call, that means you are not safe, or if you do not receive it, you are safe. So very thoughtfully crafted email. And the second is, it's obviously very difficult for a social impact organization today, not least because you're not often not working from an office and your work is out there, right? And the safety of that workplace for you is of paramount importance. So obviously, this requires much more creative thinking in terms of making it safe again for your people to go out. And I think I feel really useless most of the time giving legal advice, but it's things like this, like the webinar, where actually helping the social impact organizations, which make us feel a bit more useful. So we have a desk job, but you guys are the ones out there doing all the legwork. And I think a big shout out and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your valuable time, and we will come back in again, and I guess talk about these things, because this is going to stay. And I think something Samita already mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we don't have direction from the government or the Supreme Courts too. And I guess in a month's time, we will get a lot more clarity in terms of regulations and what is happening from the court's perspective. So June would be a right time to decide the future course of action and probably continue this conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Samita. Take care of yourself. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.